Hey guys, it's Belle, and in this video we are going to be reading through and translating just a short little epigram which was written by Pope Damasus in his collection of epigrams commemorating the Christian saints, and it was appended to the tomb of two saints known as Nereus and Achilleus. Now they were two eunuch saints who are sort of ancillary, if you'll forgive the pun, ancillary characters in the life of Saint Domitilla, who was, of course, a Roman saint whose her father wanted her to marry, and her eunuch saints converted her to Christianity and got her to leave behind the degenerate heterosexual lifestyle in favor for celibacy in Christ's favor, as Nereus and Achilleus were. Archaeologists in, I believe, the 1920s excavated a tomb on the Via Latina in Rome, which is dedicated to Nereus and Achilleus, and there's a bit of a conflict actually between the archaeology and the literary record, which is quite fascinating. I'll probably do a video about it at some point because I examined this story in quite a lot of detail during my master's degree. But basically, the textual record that we have, the saints' lives that were written down and transmitted in the Middle Ages, they describe Nereus and Achilleus as having been eunuch servants in the imperial court, whereas the tombstone depicts them as being soldiers and having spears and stuff. And that's absolutely what the poem by St. Damasus describes them as. So those two stories aren't necessarily completely incompatible, right? We know that the Byzantine general Narses, for instance, was a eunuch, but it's comparatively unlikely that they were soldiers and eunuchs at the same time. So it's a question that's worth looking into. But one thing that's consistent in both of these is that Nereus and Achilleus were very close, had a very loving relationship with each other, and they appear to have been buried together, which is quite sweet. And so without further ado, I'll go through and read the poem and translate it. Feel free to pause the video at this point and have a go at trying to translate it on your own using the gloss I provided, and as usual, forgive me if my Latin diction is not the greatest. So, militiae nomen dederant sevunque girebant, officium parditer spectantes iusa tyranni, preceptis pulsante metu servire parati, mirra fides rerum subito possuere furore. Conversi fugiunt duces impia castra relinquunt, proecium clipeos fallera selaque cruenta. Confessi gaudein Christi portare triumphos, credite per damasum posit quid gloria Christi. Okay, so what does all of this mean? Militiae nomen dederant. So they gave their name, basically, and then militiae is to military service, which is a weird way of saying they sort of dedicated their lives to military service. Sevumque gerebant officium, and they carried out a savage or a cruel office or a cruel duty. Parditer spectantes usa tyranni. So in this next line we don't have an actual indicative verb, but we have a present participle in spectantes. So they were, spectantes would more commonly mean looking at, but in this case obeying. Pariter equally, and in this case implying both of them. So both of them just as much were obeying the iusa tyranni, the commands of the tyrant, presumably the emperor. And this, of course, is implying that the emperor was persecuting Christians at the time. Preceptis pulsante metu servire parati. So this is going to require a little bit of undoing. So servire takes a dative object, and in this case that object here is preceptis, which means the precepts or the commands. So to serve or to obey the commands. Parati means they were prepared, and of course the essay here is just implied, it's not actually given. So they were always prepared to obey the commands. Pulsante metu, with fear striking them. Now this is kind of an interesting thing to include here, right? Because they've said above that the poem has said above that Nereus and Achilleus have given their life to military service and they were carrying out a savage office. But then it's saying that although they were always willing to obey the emperor's commands, they were sort of struck with fear. And this is a seemingly contradictory image, right? But what it's setting up is this picture of military service being the sort of coward's way out and the Christian path of virtue being the tougher fight to take up. That's what they're setting up with that line. And it says, Mira fides rerum. And again, we have another implied essay here. So basically, the faith of the marvelous faith of things, or the faith of things is marvelous, essentially. Subito posuere furorem. So suddenly they laid down their fury. And again, this word furor here in Latin is a kind of an interesting one because it can imply like a loss of control over one's body and one's mind. So it can, through that, intimate a degree of effeminacy, which is kind of an interesting one. Conversi fugiunt. So having been converted, they fled. Duces impia castra rencunt. They left behind the wicked forts of their general. Proeciunt clipeos faleras de la crequenta. So they throw down their shields, their military brooches, and their bloody weapons. It's interesting, actually. Well, so tela, it can mean weapon, but it's more commonly sort of spears and darts. And I believe, if memory serves me wrong, that the tomb of Nereus and Achilles found by the Via Appia actually does show them holding spears in their hands. So the archaeology and the poetry match up here. And then confessi gaudein Christi portare triumphos. And notice the parallel phrasings here. So conversi fugiunt, having converted they fled, and then confessi gaudein, having confessed they rejoiced. Christi portare triumphos, to carry the triumphs of Christ. So they've got the sort of parallel going on here, whereas beforehand they were fleeing and they threw down the symbols of secular military rights, and then having confessed, meaning confessed the Christian faith, they rejoiced to carry the triumphs of Christ. And also this message here of carrying the triumphs of Christ could actually refer to them being executed, because in the stories we know that Nereus and Achilles were in fact martyred for professing the Christian faith. So this here could be a euphemism for carrying the triumph of Christ as a form of martyrdom. And then the last line, credite per Damasum. Believe this, all of you who are reading this, through the words of Pope Damasus. Possit quid gloria Christi. Believe that which Christ's glory might accomplish. Namely, it could convert 2 Roman soldiers into good little boys fighting for Christ. And there we go. That was that cute little poem there. If you would like me to teach you Latin, you can subscribe to my Patreon, where I offer tuition at lower than market rates for my choir tier and upward patrons. And thank you so much for the 4 patrons that I currently have. Your support makes this channel much more plausible for me to do. You can also join my Discord server, where we have separate channels now for people who are learning different medieval languages that I cover on my channel. So currently we have a channel for Latin, Old English, Old High German, Old Norse, and Gothic and Ancient Greek, and we could add some more in the future if people request them. So I tend to post my glosses in the Latin channel as pictures before I turn them into videos, so you can get early access to them there. And the Discord server is also just a fun community of like-minded people. We get together, we share memes. I'm going to be trying to do more like events and such after my PhD is done. Time is a bit constrained right now. But anyway, as usual, like, comment, subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a nice day. Bye, everyone.